Welcome to the channel, English Epics. It was much more than just desire, but everything was done so gradually and so quietly that it was hard to call it a passionate romance. However, having thought about it, I came to the conclusion that it was definitely a deep love, the kind when two souls touch and wrap around each other like grapevines on a fence. It was exactly the kind of love I had always dreamed of and thought I had with my wife Tracy, with whom we had lived for 32 years. Until about 12 years ago, I discovered that everything was different. This discovery shook me to the depths of my soul and almost killed me. But fortunately, we were not at my funeral, were we? Still beautiful at 55, Tracy sat next to me and openly mourned the loss of her longtime colleague and friend, Jean, while the pastor mumbled about Jean's wonderful human qualities as a father, son, brother, and friend. I was there to support my wife in her grief. She had worked with Jean for 30 years, and during this time they had become good friends, the kind who go to lunches together with colleagues and share family stories about their children and so on. All this time, I had been hearing these stories from Tracy, and at that moment felt that he was my friend. I knew so much about him and his family. I had even met Jean and his wife Laura at several events related to Tracy's work, and in fact, the four of us got along wonderfully. So for Tracy, it was a real shock when on Saturday morning another colleague called her and reported that Jean was dead. Apparently, he had become a victim of a robbery in the parking lot of a small motel in our city last night. Lately, crime in the city was on the rise, and indeed recently our house was broken into, and the thieves stole my .22 caliber pistol and most of Tracy's jewelry. But it was just a break-in. However unpleasant it was not death. Like Tracy and me, Jean was 55 years old. He was in good shape, with a boyish face and thinning grayish chestnut hair. He was a nice guy, not Brad Pitt, but an ordinary guy living an ordinary life with 2 adult children. Judging by all the stories I had heard, he and Laura led a lifestyle similar to ours with Tracy. Nothing special, financially stable, just loafing around the yard for entertainment. Later, the police noted that he just ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. I did not feel a drop of regret when the coffin was loaded into the hearse to be taken to the cemetery. I was silent for the entire 20-minute drive, while Tracy almost uncontrollably sobbed. The short gravesite service took only 5 minutes. Then we returned to the car to head home. When we approached the car, we saw a man standing on the driver's side with a legal-type envelope in his hand. When we were a few yards away from him, he walked toward us, extended the envelope to my wife, and asked if she was Tracy Lyons. Wiping the tears from her eyes, she answered affirmatively, and as she took the envelope from him, he said, "You've been served." Tracy quickly jerked her hand away from the process server, as if he had a contagious disease. Her wet eyes widened in surprise. She looked at me, then at the envelope, as if her brain was slowly making the connection. As the man quickly walked away, Tracy unfastened the clasp on the envelope and pulled out the documents. She glanced at the first page before the tears welled up again, and with unsteady steps, she slowly made her way to her side of the car, where I was waiting, holding the door open for her. The 15-minute drive home was silent, except for Tracy's quiet sobs. Though I had expected that sooner or later the dam would break, I was not going to be the one to initiate what would undoubtedly become a real shitstorm. When we got home, Tracy went into the kitchen and sat at the table. I followed her into the kitchen, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down as well. "Why are you doing this, and why exactly on this day?" she asked quietly. "And at the cemetery?" Although at that moment I was not too proud of myself, I also was not inclined to back down. "Because I felt that it would be quite natural if you lost both of us together, if you want, exactly together, the way we were with you." Tracy lifted her head and met my gaze. She was, to put it mildly, shocked. Apparently, her thick-headed husband had finally figured it out. I never wanted to hurt you," Tracy stammered. "You know that I love you, and I should," I challenged. "You've been doing this to me for at least 22 years. Yes, I know that Haley belongs to him." She stared at me in complete bewilderment, her mouth wide open as if she couldn't figure out how to make a sound. I returned to the fridge for beer, too. Probably a good thing I had a 12-pack in there to start with. "How long have you known? How did you find out about it?" she asked. "We're so careful for you and Laura." "Right. For us and Laura." Got it. I've only known about it for the last 12 years. You guys were terribly careful, gotta give you that. Actually, no one knows about it. It was something only a spouse could guess, and that made me suspicious. Then I went and hired a private detective, and he confirmed it. Do you remember that corporate Christmas party where different spouses teamed up and played password? You and Jean were one team, and you were great together. And that's when you informed me. You two were giving clues like a married couple, with lots of gestures and assumptions, exactly how we would do it, and that's when it hit me. You two had it, and it was more than just sex, more than just an affair, and you didn't even notice. How I went quiet and stayed in that state for several weeks. So I hired a private detective, and he followed you for 3 months and documented your lunches, dates, business trips, where you both stayed in the same room, even though the company paid for 2. He noticed how you tried to change the days of your meetings, so there wouldn't be a pattern, and so it would fit into the usual routine, errands, doctor visits, and all that. He especially noted that you two seemed to be in love with each other, unlike the usual lust-driven lovers who just copulate like animals. By this time, I was already gasping, and tears were streaming down my face. I loved you, baby. How could you do this to me? I cried. I still love you, Lee. I always loved you. And I always will. It's just that there was a place in my heart for Jean, too. I didn't plan it that way. It just happened, and I couldn't give up either of you. And Jean felt the same about Laura. So we just left a little space for each other and did everything possible to keep the love for you, Tracy said quietly, then explained Haley. I blurted out in response, encouraged by my efforts. She looked surprised again, but I intervened before she could continue. Not knowing how long you two had been together, but knowing how long you had worked together, I decided that I needed to do a DNA test on the kids, and I made sure to grab a plastic cup that Jean drank from at the last corporate meeting so they would have something to compare it with. And damn it, Haley was a perfect match for husband two's sample. Well, if that's not a sign of love, when husband one unknowingly raises husband two's child, then I don't know what is. Tracy turned deep red and lowered her head. I sat in silence, scorching my wife with my gaze while she looked increasingly embarrassed. I'm waiting. I demand it. Let's hear it all from the very beginning. You owe me a lot. Obviously, it's not easy to tell your husband of 32 years that you've been cheating on him for 24 of them. Tracy hesitated, cleared her throat, stayed silent a little longer, and finally began to speak. According to her, their affair started quite innocently, as workplace flirting between good friends, and it was 6 months before the first sexual contact. Jean's manhood was no bigger than mine, and he didn't use it any better than me, but she had to admit that the pleasure of illicit sex was enormous, and it remained an important part of their relationship, at least for the first 2 years. According to Tracy, since each of them had a strong family life, it wasn't easy to carve out a few hours a week to be together, but with greater difficulties came greater rewards. But as they spent more time together and worked very hard to organize this work, the couple gradually realized that they were falling in love with each other, though they hadn't fallen out of love with their spouses, Tracy continued. Tracy said that Haley really was an accident. While the couple had been having sex all this time without a condom because Tracy had started taking birth control pills without my knowledge, when she had to temporarily stop taking them due to a medical procedure, she forgot to inform Jean, and within 2 weeks, Tracy had an accident. And when a home pregnancy test 12 weeks later confirmed what Tracy suspected, she decided not to tell me and let me believe the child was mine, since we had always been having sex bareback, and I didn't know that Tracy had been on the pill. Tracy knew I would be thrilled about a third child, and I didn't disappoint her. Even now, long after I found out she isn't mine, I still love Haley no less, and no one will tell me she isn't my child. So, how thrilling was it for you to carry another man's child? I interrupted. Just don't tell me you didn't think about it. And you certainly must have thought about how disrespectful you were to me by doing this. I was right on both counts, and all Tracy could do was blink away even more tears in response. After a pause lasting no less than 30 seconds, she finally answered almost in a whisper. I felt incredibly sexy the whole time, knowing that I was knocked up by another man, she admitted. And it was always a great comfort to me watching my 3 kids play together, knowing that I am a mother to all 3, and 2 good men are the fathers. And now I will always have a part of him, thanks to Haley. She made that last statement too proudly for it to be any comfort to me. Just keep that to yourself, because as far as I'm concerned, Haley is my daughter, and if she ever finds out that's not the case, I will burn you to the ground. I have photos and videos I never planned to use, but I will if I have to, I blurted in Tracy's direction. This exchange of remarks apparently brought Tracy completely back to reality, and her tone shifted from soft and emotional to determined and unpleasant. That suited me just fine because I wasn't expecting this to be easy. So, why did you wait so long to get a divorce if you knew about this for so long? She hissed at me. Did I miss the chapter where my big and strong hubby realized he likes being a cuckold? That one got me. Not that I wanted to be a cuckold, but I was surprised she even knew the term. You can thank the state for that. When I went to a lawyer with plans to file suit, he explained to me that you would get the house and the kids, plus alimony on top. If I stayed until the kids finished college, then losing the kids and the house would no longer be an issue. We'd split the proceeds from selling the house, and your alimony would also be lower. He told me that since you only sleep with one guy, the chances of getting sick were low, and continuing a relationship with a beautiful woman like you until the last of the kids finished college definitely had to be better than what was waiting for me ahead if I got divorced. So if I had been smarter, I would have swallowed my pride and let you marry your second husband, at least until you wanted a divorce. At the time, neither of us knew that you both preferred for things to stay as they were until you did. So for me, it became a marriage of convenience. I could spend 5 or 6 days a week with my beautiful wife, and Jean spent the remaining 1 or 2 days with her. Even though I no longer loved you with the passion I had before I found out about this affair, I still loved you. And I loved our children and our life. So prudence really was the better part of valor. Tracy looked at me with slight surprise, probably because she had never considered me a cunning person. I think she always believed she had the upper hand, and that, if necessary, she would be the one pulling the strings. And then 2 months ago, Haley finished school, I added. My plans regarding both of you were made many years ago. Take a look at my plan for you, I said, nodding at the papers. However, first, I had to carry out my plan regarding Jean, and I needed the right opportunity to make it happen. What plan regarding Jean? What are you talking about? Tracy asked questioningly, her voice trembling with panic. You, better than anyone, should know my abilities and the way my mind works. But maybe after cheating on me for so long, you just decided that I was a nobody, a complete idiot who didn't even know his wife was slipping away from him. So why bother worrying about retribution? You do realize, of course, that since you were the last person to see Jean alive in public at the Rusty Mollusk, where you two had lunch, the police will naturally want to get a statement from you. And if they conduct any DNA analysis, they'll find that you were also another person in the room he rented at the hotel, naturally under a fake name. At the very least, you need to come up with a damn good story for Laura. You sleep with her husband, and then he turns up dead. Not a great look. Talk about an unfortunate coincidence. A whole storm of emotions flashed across Tracy's face. I had said enough, but not too much. Was there any truth to my hints? Would the police think she killed Jean? They would certainly have to tell Laura that Tracy had been having sex with Jean at the hotel, and if they kept investigating, they might uncover much more than what could be told to the widow. I went to the fridge for my 6th beer. I just sat at the table and stared. At Tracy's tormented face, at the tears streaming down her cheeks as she sobbed. In fact, I had been waiting for weeks for Tracy and Jean to start using the combination of the Rusty Mollusk and the Horizon Hotel. I knew it was one of their favorite spots, but since they were very careful, they had several combinations they used. However, Horizon was my best opportunity because there were no surveillance cameras in its parking lot. When Tracy told me that on Friday night, about 2 months after Haley's graduation, their work group was going to unwind a little, and that they were going to visit a bar in the northern part of the city, I knew it was a lie, and that I had a chance. Thanks to the work of my private detective several years ago and my personal investigation conducted over the years, I knew that they often had lunch at the Mollusk, a sort of secluded seafood place, and then went to the Horizon for a family visit where husband and wife united. It could have been sweet if not for the fact that they were both already married to others. I told Tracy that her plan suited me just fine. I would just go to my favorite sports bar and be obnoxious all evening. And on Friday night, I was there so that everyone knew I was there, and I drank too much, except that, when they weren't looking, I was dumping most of my beer into a corner of the outdoor beer garden. Then, hoping that my wife had timed it right, I waited until I was sure they were about to finish so I could get to the horizon using a faster detour I had found. As usual, Tracy left a few minutes before Jean, heading to the gym to take a quick shower and dry off so that I wouldn't find out anything, while Jean took a shower at the motel so Laura wouldn't find out either. 15 minutes after I saw Tracy, leave Jean, who always checked them into the horizon as Mr. and Mrs. Gary Washington, stepped out of the room. I waited until he reached his car in the parking lot before stepping out from the shadows of the building. I called his name, and he froze in place when he realized it was me. Even before he saw the gun in my hand, he showed fear because he thought I had finally found out about the affair and was about to beat the shit out of him. He shouldn't have been so lucky. I pumped 2 .22 caliber bullets into his chest from the gun that had supposedly been stolen from my house earlier, and I watched as his fear turned to agony and then to death. While Tracy washed his marks on her body at the gym, her husband too was dying in the car park, the fault of husband 1. I guess I should have felt guilty about taking a human life, but after so many years of being cheated on, I think I just didn't have a drop of compassion left. I took apart the gun to later dispose of it at several incinerators around the city and returned to my alibi. I slipped into the sports bar through the back door and headed to the restroom, where I punched myself in the stomach to induce violent vomiting, which was heard by several people standing near the room. At that moment, a few of my buddies came in and took my supposedly stumbling ass home. When Tracy came home around 11:30 p.m., I was lying in bed unconscious and snoring like a freight train, or at least that's how it seemed to her. Turning off the light in the room, she quietly undressed, gently kissed me on the forehead, and whispered, "Good night, my ignorant husband. I love you." I sat at the table and drank 3 more cans of beer in silence, while Tracy sobbed like a child. It had been a rough few days for her. On Friday, she had 2 loving husbands and a perfect life. By Monday evening, she had no loving husbands left and was the mistress of a man who had become the subject of a murder investigation. I admit that 12 years was a long time to wait, but sometimes patience pays off. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of English Epics. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.